All women are manipulators, selfish, and gateways to eternal suffering. Harsh words. This isn't an internet comment or a cliché from a bygone era. It's the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the deepest thinkers in history. He didn't just see women as inferior, he saw them as the embodiment of the very force that traps humanity in endless pain. Don't believe it? Then watch until the end, because behind his contempt lies not hatred, but a cold, relentless logic that's hard to ignore. And maybe, just maybe, it explains why your relationships keep falling apart. Be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine this, a man who delved into the very core of existence, reaching a point where even life itself appeared to him as a tragic mistake. Arthur Schopenhauer was not merely a philosopher, he was a surgeon of reality, cutting not with a scalpel, but with words. His thinking does not bend toward hope, nor lean toward consolation. He stares pain in the face and does not look away. But the coldest turn in his philosophy isn't his denial of happiness. It lies in how he interprets the feminine. Not as image, not as symbol, not as metaphor, but as a biological and metaphysical phenomenon that drags humanity even deeper into the vortex of suffering. His essay on women is not just a text, it's a philosophical provocation, a hammer brought down on centuries of poetry, idealization, and cultural narrative. He writes, "Women are by nature more loyal to the species than to the individual." He says this not in anger, but with the icy certainty that only deeply rooted conviction can provide. To him, a woman is not a goal, not a companion, not an ally, but a mechanism, an instrument of the blind will to life, a force he himself holds in contempt. There is no genius in her, he claims. Only repetition, preservation, and submission to the biological imperative. And here lies the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy. He rejects everything that prolongs existence, because existence itself, to him, is a mistake. Femininity, in his view, is not merely vulnerable or secondary. It is a functional element of the grand tragedy of being, a hostage to the will that compels us to desire, and thus, to suffer. And this is the key, he does not hate women as individuals. He rejects the force that, through them, perpetuates suffering. Woman as mother, as temptation, as object of desire, to him, is an instrument of the will, and therefore, a source of illusions that lead to pain. I understand him, not in hatred, in logic. I, too, have seen lives unravel in the pursuit of love. How promises of happiness, built on biological attraction, turn into years of pain, fatigue, and loneliness. How many times have we, in love, naively believed this time it's real, only to find ourselves trapped in the same repeating patterns. In these traps, there is no malice, only mechanics. The human drive to repeat, to follow instincts disguised as feelings. A pattern that always ends the same way, with boredom, disillusionment, and pain. Schopenhauer doesn't try to break this cycle. He exposes it, and in that lies his strength. He offers no escape, he offers clarity. Life is a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom, he wrote. If that's true, then romance, the glorification of the feminine, the belief in love as salvation, are nothing more than attempts to decorate a prison cell. It hurts me to admit it, but there is truth in this. My life has broken more than once on the pursuit of the one. Each time, I believed it would be different. That this time, she would understand, she wouldn't wound me. But the pattern repeated, as if it wasn't me choosing, but the will, invisible and merciless, reaching out and pressing the buttons. Schopenhauer doesn't say woman is to blame. He says, she is part of a structure in which existence itself is guilty. And in that, paradoxically, there's a kind of liberation. Because once illusions are shattered, once the veil is lifted, at least you no longer suffer from false hopes. No more worship, no more idealization, no more expecting poetry from biology. This is not a philosophy for those seeking comfort. It's a philosophy for those who dare to look into the abyss and expect no kindness in return. If you, like me, have ever felt like a victim of your own expectations crushed by reality, you'll understand. There is a searing truth in the coldness of his logic. That's why I believe we shouldn't condemn him, but listen. Because even if you don't accept everything he says, even a fragment of it can open your eyes and make you a little less vulnerable in a world where, as he wrote, pain is not the exception, but the rule. In the mid-19th century, when Europe still clung to illusions of progress and humanism, Arthur Schopenhauer published an essay that made no effort to appear gentle. No attempt to disguise itself as reflective philosophy. It entered into direct conflict with reality. On women, so simple, so uncompromising. It wasn't a treatise in the spirit of Socrates, nor a Platonic allegory. It was an exposed, sharp, almost anatomical. The lines of that text feel as if they were carved from stone by the chisel of cold logic, untouched by compassion. And perhaps that's exactly why they have survived in the memory of generations. Schopenhauer doesn't paint, he carves. He doesn't critique, he condemns. His words, "Women lack a true sense of justice," don't come across as a hypothesis, but as a verdict. He writes about them as beings devoid of depth, prone to cunning, emotional immaturity, and adaptability. Their beauty, in his view, is not a blessing, but nature's deception. It is merely bait to lure men into the trap of reproduction, he claims. Even aesthetics, the very thing that inspired poets for centuries, becomes, in his philosophy, a trap, a biological lure. And there's a truth in that one you might want to turn away from. But you can't. I've seen it too many times. Beauty not used as an expression of inner light, but as a tool. I've seen people fall in love not with a soul, but with an outline, a gesture, a glance, behind which lay emptiness or calculation. I've watched how evolution works through attraction, pushing intelligent, strong, whole people to do irrational things, simply because their biology responded to something ancient. This isn't about blame, it's about mechanics. About the will, as Schopenhauer called it, the faceless, blind force that acts through us. His aversion to marriage wasn't a personal grievance, it was a metaphysical rejection. For him, marriage was not a union, but a trap. It is a deal in which a man pays to become the slave of his own lust, he wrote. Yes, it sounds brutal, but isn't that the point? How many marriages have been entered not out of love, but out of need, habit, or fear of being alone? How many men and women have found themselves trapped by social expectations, believing it was the path to happiness, only to end up in a void with no way out? I've seen it, I've lived it, and at some point, I realized Schopenhauer wasn't attacking love, he was exposing its illusion. He didn't hate women, he saw in them the same force that caused suffering in men. He viewed life as a theater, where the roles are assigned by nature, and every act leads to the same end, suffering. From his perspective, the female nature is not evil, but a function, a form into which the will has poured yet another vessel. In this essay, there is not just contempt, there is fear. A deep, ancient fear of life, of the flesh, of the inexorability of reproduction as a machine that will never stop. He didn't just write about women, he wrote about life, encapsulated in the female form, about how it traps us in the cycle of suffering. How it deceives, promising joy through closeness, only to return us to pain through disappointment, rejection, emptiness. I cannot reject him, not because his words are pleasant or painless, but because they are accurate. He was the one who saw the structure, without being deceived by the packaging. His gaze was that of a surgeon, cutting through tissue to reveal the rot. And if some find this excessive, it's perhaps because the truth is rarely convenient. He wasn't seeking dialogue, he was stating facts. And that's what makes his essay timeless. Because in every generation, there will be someone who, disillusioned by familiar narratives, will look into the abyss and see not evil, but the truth that has long been feared to be spoken. But beneath his harshness, behind the poisonous clarity of his words, something deeper and more unsettling emerges, not just the denial of women as individuals, but the denial of the very idea of consolation, and that sends a chill down the spine. For, in cultural memory, woman has for centuries been the final refuge, the image of mother, lover, muse, savior. In her, there was hope, and he shatters even that. He doesn't just deny women, he denies meaning in them. He pulls from the human psyche the last support in a world where everything else has been recognized as illusory. When the feminine as a symbol disappears, so too does the possibility of finding meaning in warmth, in a home, in an embrace. All that remains is cold. Only the will, mad, formless, insatiable. And this destruction of illusions, this too is a form of freedom. A paradox, but in this refusal of comfort comes the chance for authenticity. For how many times have I tried to find salvation in others, in those who seemed to be light, only to discover each time that I was not seeking a person, but an idea, a projection created by my need to be saved. Not her soul, but her reflection in my own fear of loneliness. And when Schopenhauer says that all of this is nature's deception, that our desire for closeness is not a call of the spirit but a trick of the body, he doesn't destroy love, he returns power to you. He shows you that everything you considered sacred was merely a veil over the mechanism of the continuation of suffering. And in this lies the chance to stop being its prisoner. Yes, it hurts, it breaks you. But it is only after such internal collapses that you begin to see, not through the lens of desire, not through fear, but directly. When hope that relied on illusion crumbles, what remains is truth. And though it is cold, there is a strange, quiet relief in its transparency. I knew a woman who always said she dreamed of true love. She idealized men, turning them into heroes of novels, into her personal saviors. And every time, she painfully fell when reality refused to match her expectations. She couldn't understand why everything fell apart, why men betrayed, disappeared, and distanced themselves. But if she had read Schopenhauer, she would have understood. It wasn't them to blame, it was her belief that someone must be the source of meaning. The nature of women, like that of men, in his philosophy is impersonal. It is part of a system where suffering is not a mistake, but an algorithm. And when you understand this, the blame disappears. What remains is the realization: we are not evil, we are simply led. We dance without knowing who is playing the music. Schopenhauer did not ask for consent. He did not seek understanding. He left words as a blade. And if it cuts, it means you are alive. And if you are alive, you still have the chance to choose, to continue going in circles or to finally step beyond them. Behind every thinker, there is not just ideas, but pain. Behind every philosophical structure, there are scars hidden beneath neat paragraphs. Arthur Schopenhauer, whose philosophy relentlessly denies hope, was not born in a vacuum. His toxic perception of the feminine did not begin with metaphysical reflections, it began at home. There, where the primary archetypes are formed. Where the psychological topography of what would later be called truth is laid down. His mother, Johanna Schopenhauer, was not just a parent to him, she was a challenge. A woman who was successful, brilliant, and recognized by the cultural elite. She wrote, hosted literary salons, gathered minds and applause around her, the very things Arthur despised the most. She was not a mother in the traditional sense. She did not dissolve into care. She shone, and he suffered from her indifference. Their relationship, and this was not a dialogue, was a front. It was an intellectual duel, where every strike was disguised as a reproach. He accused her of emptiness, narcissism, and a desire for cheap recognition. She replied, "You are incapable of loving anything except your own ideas." And in these words lay what he feared most in himself: an inability to feel, an impossibility of being vulnerable, the fear that behind all his theories lay only emptiness, one that no person could fill. And so, he forged his pain into philosophy. He never came to terms with his mother, he turned her into a symbol. The woman ceased to be an individual. She became a generalization, a mask of the will, a tool of suffering. Thus, personal resentment turned into metaphysics. Thus, childhood longing transformed into hatred for the very nature of the feminine. I understand him. Moreover, I myself was trapped in this mechanism. When the image of the mother in my life began to crack, I tried to hold on to the ideal. But the older I got, the clearer the rift became between what I wanted to see and what was actually there. Unspoken pain, prolonged alienation, words that were never spoken in childhood, all of this turned into an involuntary aversion to vulnerability. I didn't trust women, not because they had deceived me, but because once, the one who was supposed to be my support refused to be that. And to avoid going mad, I, like him, chose philosophy, armor, theory. Schopenhauer does not defend himself, he attacks, because his pain is not just a sharp edge, it is the foundation. He does not allow himself to forgive because he cannot allow himself to hope again. And that is why he writes, "Woman is the manifestation of the will to life itself," not in a poetic sense, but as an essence that imposes the endless continuation of suffering on humanity. The mother gave life, but did not give warmth, and this feeling of betrayal he projected onto all of feminine nature. He did not hate women, he feared their power, the power to give birth, to attract, to bind, a power that makes you vulnerable. And in order not to remain weak, he took a step from which there is no turning back. He stopped feeling. He began thinking. This is a philosophy not of cruelty, but of survival. It was born not out of anger, but from the impossibility of healing. When you cannot touch the pain, you create a system from it. You build a great theory to justify your alienation. And if someone calls Schopenhauer a misogynist, they are wrong. He was not a misogynist. He was a son whose soul was once left unanswered, and he wrapped this vacuum in philosophy, not to feel, but to explain. And that is why his thoughts remain alive to this day, because within each of us lies this vulnerability, this refusal to be vulnerable again. And in his ruthless logic of liberation from hopes, illusions, and empty expectations, there is a path. Where faith in another ends, the journey to oneself begins, not to soft consolation, but to truth. Schopenhauer didn't just write about women. He wove them into the fabric of his metaphysics as an inevitable element of the drama played out by the will. He didn't view the feminine through the lens of social roles or even personal interaction. He looked deeper, to the place where the human becomes impersonal and transforms into a function of nature. For him, a woman was not a subject. She was a channel, a conduit, the embodiment of the very force from which he sought to escape, the will to life. The very will that knows no purpose, no meaning, no end. Only eternal repetition, only the thirst for continuation. In this light, the feminine became not a symbol of beauty, but a mechanism of enslavement. Nature uses women as bait, as he wrote, to lure men into the trap of procreation. She doesn't seduce consciously, she is the seduction. Not as a being, but as a form, an aesthetic mask of biology, behind which lies the ruthless mathematics of reproduction. He believed that love was not a gift of fate, but a deception of evolution. What seems like a choice is, in reality, a command. A man, walking toward a woman, thinks he is striving for closeness, but in truth, he is fulfilling the will of the species, fitting into a scheme where everything has already been decided. And I confess, I've seen this in myself. How many times I've felt attraction as an almost sacred call, only to later realize it's not about the soul, it's an instinct wrapped in a romantic myth. It's nature whispering, choose, continue, multiply. Schopenhauer calls it a trap, and if you don't listen to it, you remain forever a prisoner of the mechanism, disguised as passion. He didn't see women as moral agents, as equal participants in the building of culture or morality. She's not a thinker, but a reflection of the will. She's not an architect of meaning, but its antithesis. A woman is nature itself in its most brazen and unyielding form, he claimed. And if you accept this as an axiom, everything else falls into place in a neat, disturbingly logical system. In this system, a woman's submission is not injustice, but a return to the natural order. And resistance to this order is the source of chaos. Once, I watched a man, overwhelmed by passion, destroy everything he had built over the years. He quit his job, betrayed his principles, succumbed to impulse, and was left alone in the ruins of his own life, not understanding what had happened to him. At that moment, it became clear to me. We too often confuse freedom with urge. We mistake will for choice, passion for love, temptation for fate. Schopenhauer simply removed this mask. He wrote not out of malice, but out of horror at the uncontrollable. He didn't condemn women, he tried to warn, because in the power of women, he saw not evil, but inevitability, not personal guilt, but a cosmic mechanism. And that's why his philosophy is not just controversial, it's dangerous, because behind it, there's not emotion, but calculation. He didn't scream, he made a diagnosis, and as we know, a diagnosis doesn't need explanation if the whole organism is affected. Women's intellect is adaptive, but not abstract, he said. This is not an offense, this is an observation. She is capable of feeling but not thinking abstractly. Her empathy, in his view, doesn't come from compassion, but from the fear of loss. Even her softness is not a sign, but a survival strategy, a form set by nature, not for self-realization, but for preservation. He saw this not as a deficiency, but as a function. And if you accept his logic, it becomes clear why, for him, female emancipation didn't seem like progress, but a disruption of balance. I know how difficult it is to accept this. I myself resisted for a long time because I was raised to believe in equality, in the joint evolution of souls, in the possibility of mutual support. But the more I observed, sincerely, without the desire to please ideals, the clearer it became. Schopenhauer was not blind. He simply looked where most are afraid to look, into the zone where familiar categories of morality disappear, where love is not altruism, but a biological trick, where kindness is not a value, but a consequence of fear. He didn't build prisons, he just showed the bars that were already there. He didn't call for submission, he asserted that it was already happening, only masquerading as freedom. And once you've seen this cage, you can't unsee it. So, either you keep pretending, or, like him, you renounce not the woman, but the lie about her. This is not hatred, it's ultimate honesty. And perhaps in this lies the only path to true liberation. And yet, the scariest thing in Schopenhauer's philosophy isn't even his conclusions, but the silence that remains after them. When the romantic narrative is destroyed, it's not just faith in others that disappears, it's faith in the very possibility of meaning in connections. If the woman is a mechanism, if we are mechanisms of nature, and love is an illusion, then what is left? The body, instinct, the program. This is where the paradox lies. He didn't belittle women, he belittled the very hope that intimacy could be something more than replication and suffering. Schopenhauer didn't see the female as an enemy, but as a manifestation of what he couldn't bear in himself: desire, longing, involvement. He said, will is the essence of everything, but in women, it becomes visible to the point of horror, because where we seek comfort, he saw a mechanism. Where we hope for tenderness, he saw a cold, blind structure. He renounced intimacy because every time he got closer, he felt himself losing himself. And in order to preserve what little inner sovereignty he had left, he renounced the image, the connection, the belief. And I understand his fear. I, too, have been in relationships where at first it seemed, this is it, the one. Where every touch felt like home, every word sounded like a promise. And then emptiness, manipulation hidden beneath care, a concealed price for intimacy. And in that, it wasn't betrayal by a person I recognized, but the predictability of nature. As if everything had been written in advance, as if freedom had never truly existed. Schopenhauer says, you think you are choosing. No, you are obeying. And that wounds more deeply than any personal grievance, because it takes away the last illusion, freedom in love. He naturalized what others romanticized. He didn't say, women are bad, he said, women aren't to blame, nor are men. It is the will that is to blame, but in women, it shines too brightly and that light blinds. His metaphor is a form of desperate self-defense from believing again, from surrendering again. His philosophy is a monastery without God. There is no comfort there, but there is clarity. And sometimes, in the darkest nights, that is what saves you. When there's no shoulder nearby, no words to hold on to, when the pain becomes unbearable, only truth remains, cold as metal, but honest. And in that truth, one can survive, one can stand, one can avoid falling into illusion. Schopenhauer offers no hope, he offers sight. And if you're willing to look, you'll see what no books, no films, no fairy tales reveal. He shows how the world works without embellishment, without poetry. But in that stripped-down structure, perhaps, lies the beginning of real freedom. Not freedom from woman, but freedom from the will. Freedom from the inner prison, where every impulse is a pre-designed route. It's not a path for everyone, but if you step onto it once, there's no way back. Only forward into the cold, where perhaps there is no love, but there is peace. Arthur Schopenhauer's views have not dissolved into the fog of philosophical history. Like cracks spreading across glass, they continue to branch out, provoking either protest or a silent recognition. His essay on women hasn't been lost on the shelves of academic archives. It remains alive not because people seek comfort in it, but because it unsettles. People read it through gritted teeth, quote it in anger, reject it and yet return to it, because within its harshness is the voice of someone who dared to say what most wouldn't even allow themselves to think. Many see in those lines a stunned pain, not an argument, but a confession. Some point to the author's loneliness, to his failed relationships, trying to explain his philosophy through psychoanalysis. Perhaps they're right, but that's precisely what makes his voice so authentic. He writes not from the halls of abstraction, but from the cold room of his own despair. He wasn't indifferent, he was wounded, and a wounded philosopher is dangerous, because his pain sharpens his vision. He doesn't merely express an opinion, he turns it into a structure, into a system. I feel this depth not as a reader, but as a participant. I know that state when everything you reach for turns into emptiness, when the objects of desire become sources of suffering, and each new cycle of longing feels like a recurring dream where you know how it ends, yet still wake up in tears. Schopenhauer offers no comfort. He shows us that perhaps it was all an illusion to begin with, and in that lies his honesty. Feminist thinkers, especially Simone de Beauvoir, did not ignore him. They dissected his thoughts to the atom, extracting the fear at their core, fear of a power that defies logic. For de Beauvoir, he wasn't describing women, he was describing the shadow of his own unfreedom. His philosophy, in her reading, is not a mirror of the world, but a projection of his own vulnerability. But does that make him wrong or even more truthful? What if fear is not a weakness, but a marker of deep recognition? What if, in seeing womanhood as the embodiment of the will, he wasn't merely avoiding but perceiving? He didn't condemn. He refused to submit. His philosophy is not about hatred. It is about escape, not from woman, but from the will, from that force which deceives us with the promise of happiness while feeding us suffering. Nietzsche, seemingly his disciple, chose another path. He danced where Schopenhauer stood still. In woman, Nietzsche saw mystery, play, magic. But he, too, remained outside. Neither of them let the woman in as an equal, simply because both saw not a person, but a force of attraction beyond reason. Nietzsche smiled at that force, Schopenhauer hid from it. I've seen how modern minds use his words for their own purposes. Internet forums, radical manifestos, pseudo-intellectual debates, his voice echoes everywhere. But do they truly hear him, or only rip convenient quotes from context to justify their own weakness? Schopenhauer did not justify cruelty, he analyzed it. He did not say, dominate, he said, be afraid of the will, be afraid of yourself, be afraid of the attachment that makes you vulnerable, and then destroys you. His philosophy wounds not the woman, but the idea that love might save us. He writes, woman is the embodiment of everything one must renounce in order to be free, and if you've ever found yourself at that point where closeness brings only pain, you'll understand. This isn't misogyny, it's an attempt to preserve the self. But this is also his limit, because the rejection of feeling does not bring healing. It offers only survival, and survival is not life. I felt it when I tried to live a day without love, like him when I replaced touch with thought, conversation with silence. It can be endured, but it does not bring wholeness. Schopenhauer is an unfinished path. He is a map of pain, and like any map, it shows where danger lies, but not where to go next. We read him not to follow, but to understand what happens when genius traps pain into form and can no longer escape it. His clarity is icy, his insight brutal, but it is true, and that is why we have no right to ignore it. I believe this. Genius without love becomes a blade. It can pierce through lies, but it cannot save. And perhaps that's our lesson: to read, to understand, to feel, and to move beyond it, toward a place where clarity and compassion coexist. Schopenhauer gave us the vision. It is up to us to decide what to do with it, to wound or to heal.